For some people in this room, Tal is a student, an intern, and a colleague. He's done pretty well since then, and I'm very excited to hear his presentation. I think he'll do a better job explaining what he does with letters, so I'll just share a fun few facts about him that I've learned. He doesn't know what Pokemon Go is. He's extremely obsessed with Disney parks. Most of his emails start with, "Sorry for the delayed response." And lastly, he thinks he should have gotten an A instead of a B in graphic abstraction. Here we go, Tal Leming, everyone.
Okay. Thank you all for coming out. It is, I know everybody says this, but it's an honor to stand up here and talk to you because I used to go to these, and I know a lot of you in the room, and I know you're really busy, so that you came out to watch me talk about letters makes me really proud. So thank you all. Thank you to the AdFed for bringing me down. Thank you to Baton Rouge Printing for being the student sponsor and for printing my wedding invitation 20 years ago. So I'm a type designer. It might be the most meaningless job on earth, but somebody does it, and that's me, and you're here, so we'll talk about it. So I'm from Louisiana. I'm from Zachary. I was born and raised, lived the first 26 years of my life here. First 12 years of my career were spent here in Baton Rouge. Now, what I do now, whenever everybody in here knows what a typeface is, but 99.999 to infinity% of the world does not know what a typeface is. And I always get asked the question, like in social settings, so what do you do? And I dodge the question. I say I'm a designer. And if somebody's really persistent, they'll say, and what do you design? And then it follows a script every single time. It's like, I make typefaces. And they go, what? And I say, in Microsoft Word, when you pick a font, I make fonts. And they go, you make the fonts in Microsoft Word. And I was like, no, I didn't make the fonts in Microsoft Word. And then they look really disappointed. And I'm like, no, but I've made some that you've seen. And they're like, that's an unusual job, which is a polite way of saying no one really needs to do that. But I do have a bit of an unusual job. When I was in Baton Rouge, I was a graphic designer. And that work is very different from what I do now. But the things that I learned here in Baton Rouge from my coworkers and my mentors, and my bosses, and everyone, my teachers, I won't even have time to talk about how much my teachers taught me, really formed the foundation of what I do now. If you're thinking that you may remember me, but maybe not, I was the overly eager, petulant, socially inept, hopelessly naive, obnoxious kid in the meetings. And I'm really sorry. So I started working when I was 14. Greg Milnick, I don't think I saw Greg here. Greg hired me to be an animator when his company was called The Video Company. And it was amazing to be a 14-year-old and to have a job where I had to go and do things. And after that, I worked at the newspaper in Zachary designing ads. That was my senior year of high school, and then I went to LSU and I worked for the wonderful Kathy Carroll at the Division of Continuing Education, and with Kelly at the LSU Student Union, and I got my BFA from LSU. Hi, Mr. Bauer. So the thing that I learned early in my career was that I had to work hard. And I know that seems obvious, but when you're 14, you don't know that. So it was a really good thing to learn at a really young age. And I also learned something really important, and that's that clients aren't stupid. I remember I would show, when I was working for Kathy at Continuing Ed, I would design like a brochure, and she would take it and show the client, and they would come back with comments, and I was always just completely and utterly frustrated because they didn't recognize my genius. And Kathy was like, well, you kind of need to put the phone number on there. I was like, but it's messing up my white space. But it was a really, that was a good thing for an 18-year-old to learn. The most important thing that happened then was we had a really old computer in the continuing ed communications office, and it was the one no one wanted to work on, and I wanted to work a lot, so I used it. And I discovered that there was this piece of software on it called Fontographer, and I could make fonts in it. And I was 18 and stupid and didn't know any better, and so I just started making fonts for the publications at the office, and they were really, really bad. The first one was named Fun Chicken, which if you remember the Walmart that used to be over there, there was a chicken thing where you could get the plastic eggs with a prize. It was called Fun Chicken, and the font was named after that. That's a joke I can only tell here. But I really fell in love with this. I liked being able to make tools that I was going to be able to use. And I started making them in my own free time, and I made this one. This was the first one I made for myself. And I sold it to House Industries. I wrote them a letter and was like, you should buy my fonts. And they did, and I used to be really embarrassed by this, but now it's really funny. For a long time, I pretended that this didn't exist, but you can totally buy it. It's worth every penny. After I finished school, I went to DSI. Shout out to everybody from DSI in here. Where I worked with some really, really great people. Lonnie and Chris and Nicole and everyone. And I remember I'm a reductivist by nature in my work. So when I start a project, I like to just stick lots of stuff together and then take as much of it away as I can until there's just a bare thing left. It's because I like clarity. And as a young designer, I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew that I wanted things to be simple. And that manifested itself in lots of white space. And I remember I was designing this one ad for Our Lady of the Lake, and it had, in decreasing order of prominence, a box, some text, and a picture of a baby. And I somehow had managed to talk my way out of including the Our Lady of the Lake logo. But I remember sitting at Chris's desk, and he was marking it up, and I was just kind of like, it's done, it's done. And I think he picked up on it, and he said, the thing is, when you have just a few things going on, each of those things has to be absolutely perfect. And I had never really thought about it that way. And the other thing was, at DSI, was Lonnie Carnaggio, who was my first art director and terrified me because he's extraordinarily talented. And Lonnie is, no exaggeration, I'm going to embarrass him right now. Lonnie is the best graphic designer I've ever worked with. His sense of scale and proportion and all that is just amazing. And to be a young designer and see that just changed me forever. And I thought about my work a lot, and I would build these elaborate grids and everything, and I would take my proofs over to Lonnie, and Lonnie would, tap the paper like something on the page, and then give me some gestures and sound effects, because Lonnie showed me that design was a really intuitive thing, and just because something was in the right place based on a ruler didn't mean that it looked good, and that I really needed to stop overthinking things. And that's a big part of what I do now, because I can get really lost in details because what I do is literally going to be used this big. And it doesn't really matter sometimes, but everything's got to be, right. I left DSI and I went to Zoom, which is now BR Zoom, and I worked with Dave and Kendall Worrell. And up until this point, I didn't really understand what I was doing as a designer. I thought that what I made was the end product. So a client would come to us and they would need a brochure. And I thought the brochure was what they wanted. that was not what they wanted. And Dave was really good at explaining to me, that's just part of it. The client wants a brochure because they have something to sell. And the brochure is the way that they're going to do it. And stop thinking so much about the design and look at the bigger picture. And once I learned how to do that, I could understand how to make my work actually do more for the client than what they had initially hoped for. And the other thing I learned at Zoom is a little bit more abstract. I remember I was struggling with an ad, and it was late one night, and Kendall looked at it, and she said, you need to get in the character. And what she meant was, as designers, we have taste, right? We know what we like and what we don't like. But we also have fundamentals of design that we understand, the way to position things on a page, the way to make sure that the hierarchy is right. And I was letting my personal taste get in the way. So I was trying to make something really minimal that didn't need to be really minimal. So I had to set aside my personal taste and still keep my sense of the overall principles. And I had to really think through who the target audience was. And I had never really thought about it that way. So those are all principles that I learned here. And they're pretty much 100% of what I do now. Around the same time, I emailed House Industries because I was certain they owed me millions of dollars for that amazing typeface. And I hadn't heard from them in like 5 years. So I emailed them, and I was like, so how are sales? And the response was literally, not good. And I responded with, hey, my wife and I are going to be on vacation in Washington, D.C. Aren't you guys near there? And they said, oh, yeah, come on up. And they're in Delaware. And I said, come up and just say hi. And I'd never met them in person. So I went up, and they gave me a bunch of free stuff. And I misunderstood something they said, and they misunderstood my response. And somehow, inexplicably, I left there with a project. They asked me to design a typeface for them. So I came back, and I went to Dave, and I was like, they want me to do this. And he was like, that's fine. So I made a typeface for them, and they started selling it, and it sold more copies than the other one. So then something really unexpected happened. They offered me a job as a type designer, and I didn't want to take it. My wife and I talked about it a long time. I loved my job at Zoom. I loved working with Dave and Kendall. I love Baton Rouge and Louisiana, and I didn't want to leave. And I agonized over it, and I finally decided I would just tell Dave and Kendall why I was acting even more weird than usual. So it was late one night, and I told them what was going on, except I'm really inarticulate, as you've noticed, and I sort of phrased it as, I've made a decision and I'm quitting, when what I meant was, I don't know what to do. And Kendall really wonderfully looked at me and she said, you have to go. This is your dream job, so you have to go. And so Margaret and I packed up, and we moved to Delaware, and I started working at House Industries. And Delaware, if you have never been to Delaware, Delaware is the exact opposite of Louisiana, like in every possible way. And they thought it was really funny that I was from Louisiana, so they made jokes about me all the time. This was my official portrait in the book about House's work. And just to clarify, I am wearing overalls, riding a crawfish, which I got into an argument when I saw this. They called it a crayfish, and we almost came to blows. And I'm holding a bottle of Tabasco sauce. Yeah. So I was supposed to be a typeface designer there, but I learned that I can't let things go. And there was a lot of graphic design work that needed to be done, and no one else was doing it, so I just started doing it. And eventually that was my full-time job there. And I did it for about 4 years, and I completely burned out on graphic design. It was a lot of work, just tons and tons of stuff, and reinventing the wheel every time, and I was done. So I quit, and I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do, but I knew that I wanted to make typefaces. So I started a company and gave it a name that would not allow me any wiggle room to do anything else. So I was like, yeah, I went that other job and took a big pay cut to go be a typeface designer, and then I didn't let myself do it. So now I'm going to call my company Typefaces, and I won't have any option. So my work falls into two categories. There's work that I do for clients. So magazines or corporations or organizations will come to me and they'll need a typeface. And so I will make them one to do a specific job for them. The top one is one that I made for Wired magazine, I guess about a year and a half ago. And they use it for headlines. They used it once really small, which was funny because it couldn't be read at all. And the bottom one is one I made for Condé Nast Traveler. And I really love these projects. The other part of my business is I make typefaces for myself that I then license to everyone. So, when you buy a font from Font Foundry, that's basically what most of my work is. One of these that I made is called United. And this started when I was working at House Industries. They wanted to make some typefaces based on military lettering. And I thought that that was a really one-note concept. It's like, okay, yeah, we could do that. But we could also make it better and make it much more versatile. So I added a sans version and a serif version and italic, and then I added a bunch of weights and then a bunch of widths, and I ended up with 105 different fonts, which is about 104 more than this project needed. But it turned out to be a really, really flexible typeface that graphic designers really latched onto, especially for sports. And you can't go anywhere in America without running into United now, and it's to the point that I'm really tired of it. Yeah, so sports. So then companies would decide, oh, we want a typeface, and of course they're sports companies, so they're like, let's get the guy who did United. So I became the official typeface designer for sports. And which is funny because I'm not exactly athletic. And I would get people calling me on the phone and they'd be talking to me about baseball, and I would just be pretending to know what I was, or like I knew what a run was. And from Louisiana, we don't play baseball in Louisiana, except at LSU. Yeah, anytime I had to do baseball stuff, I was like, you know about Skip Bertman? And they were like, yeah, and why are you bringing that up? And I was kind of like, that's because that's the only baseball thing I know. But it seems like every year or so I end up doing a project that has like a lot of sports stuff to it. I did this for Reebok in the NFL a long time ago, and they use this on everything for a season. Interesting thing, they don't care about exclusivity to typefaces until, except up until the minute the Super Bowl ends. So the contract actually said that they had exclusivity to this typeface until the final whistle of the Super Bowl. And then they didn't care, which I thought was hilarious. I did this one for Adidas basketball. They recently had a designer add some more weights to it, and now they use it for everything. This isn't my, I don't know, it's kind of boring, but they were happy, so yay. This is actually, I've never shown this to anyone until today, so it's a world premiere. And then a couple of years ago, Dick's Sporting Goods was doing a big identity redesign, and they wanted some typefaces for signage and everything, and so I made a bunch for them. And now if you go into a Dick's Sporting Goods store, all the signs and their mailers and everything use these typefaces. So I did football, hockey, which I still don't know anything about, basketball, I think there was some baseball stuff. But I never got to do the one sport that I actually care about, which is soccer. That's me. I grew up playing soccer. I love it. I really love the sport. It's an amazing game. And even more so, my wife Margaret and I, we are now the proud parents of two wonderful little boys. This is Timothy on the left, he's 5, and Michael on the right, who is 7. And Michael is really into soccer, like really into it. So I spend a lot of time taking him to practices and going to games and watching him do this to older kids. And it started to really bug me that I hadn't done anything for soccer yet. And so those of you who worked with me at DSI know I am not very good at business development, which is a polite way of saying I'm really bad at it. So I'm not good at going out and getting work. But in this case, I actually solicited work. Like, I would try to get in touch with people and be like, I want to make some fonts, and I'm the guy who made United. And I got close a couple of times, and it always fell through. We even had an elite level youth academy started in Baltimore, and as soon as I found out about it, I emailed them. I was like, I will do stuff for free because I just want to do some soccer stuff. So, they, in less than 20 seconds, responded to me, and they were like, yeah, we've got somebody really good. And I was kind of like, dude, I don't want to brag or anything, but I made United. But it really started to weigh on me, and I just gave up, and I was like, I'll just do stuff for the NFL forever, whatever. Then I was literally sitting and watching Michael play a pickup soccer game, and my phone buzzed, and I had this email. And I was 100% certain that this was one of my colleagues playing a joke on me. Because I have 2 dream clients, and the United States Soccer Federation is one of them. And there was absolutely no way this was real. If you don't know, the U.S. Soccer Federation, they are the governing body for all of soccer in the United States. They are in charge of the national teams. So when you see the national teams in the World Cup, that's the United States Soccer Federation. So I'm like super nerdy about this. And so I emailed them back, and I was like, hey, I don't know which one of you this is. I deleted that part. But I was like, sure, I'd love to talk to you about this. So I got on the phone with them, and they were really incredibly vague. They wouldn't tell me what the project was. I was a complete idiot because I was so nervous, because these are guys who know, like, Abby Wambach and Landon Donovan and all, and I'm like on the phone, I'm like, do you know Michael Bradley? And they're like, yeah, we know all of them. And then so they were like, so you make fonts? And I was like, yeah, I make fonts. And they said, we heard you were good at making the fonts. And I said, well, I don't know about that, but whoever said that, tell them I said thank you. And then they said, so you like soccer? And I said, yeah, I like soccer. And they said, okay, we may have a project for you. And I said, cool, what is it? And they said, well, we got to send you some papers first. And I got the scariest NDA I have ever seen in my life. I have seen some scary ones. Magazines always don't want anyone to know that they're changing the shape of the A in their logo, because national secrets. But this one was like legit, like, we will take your house. And I signed it, of course, because I was curious. And then it was quiet. And then they finally called me, and they were like, okay, we just emailed you a PDF. And I was like, okay, cool. And they were like, okay, so we have this logo. And I said, yes, I'm familiar with it. And we're going to have a new one. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. I could totally make some typefaces, and we have some typefaces that someone made us to go with it. And I was like, oh, man, I wanted to make the typefaces. And I was just like, okay, so this is one of those projects where you just want me to come in and just be like, okay, it's fine, and I'll do a little bit of production work on it. But I love you, so I will do it. But then they said, so what do you think? Which, as you all know, is a very dangerous question to ask a designer. And I'm on the phone, and these things are delicate, because I don't know who did this at this point. And I don't know how much they like it. So I just kind of stammered, and I was like, I have some thoughts. How close do you want to stick to this? And they said, well, that's why we're coming to you. You're a professional, so you tell us. I was like, okay, you asked for it. How about you give me a couple of days, and I write up a brief for you. what I think you need to do. And it turned out Nike had done this. They did a great job with the logo, and they did this, and they did the uniforms. Nike does all that stuff. And I said, if you want to pass my comments to Nike and they can just make the corrections, it's fine, or I can do it, whatever. I love U.S. soccer, and I just want to do what I can. So they said, okay. And so I spent the next 2 days between soccer practices and games drawing and trying to fix this and analyzing what was wrong. So remember what I said about Chris telling me about you have to, when you only have a few things going on, everything has to be perfect. The problem with this is that it's not perfect. There's not a lot going on. There's basically one stroke weight. Everything's really even. It's a sans serif. And then there are problems. Like if you look at the right side of the uppercase D, it's rounded. But if you look at the C next to it, it's not rounded. Those little things all add up and create disharmony in text. It's these little tiny details that matter. So I explained you have this typeface. It's a mix of flat shapes and round shapes, and you've got to pick a direction. You can't have both. You have to pick one. This is what it would look like if it was rounded. And this is what it would look like if it was squared off. And this is awesome, and this is what you should do. And I'm so confident that you should do this that I will show you what numbers will look like on the back of uniforms. And I was like, I have nailed this. And so I sent my document off, and they were very quiet. And I was pretty certain I was going to be fired, even though they hadn't actually paid me anything yet. And so they said, let's set up a call. I was like, okay, here it comes. So I get on the phone, and they're like, so we have this one, right? And it's been through this 2-year approval process. And we like it, so we're wondering if you can fix it. And on the phone, I was all like, yeah, sure, you're U.S. Soccer, and you know Michael Bradley, so of course. But inside, I was pretty sad. Because I wanted to make my thing for them. I wanted to do a typeface that I would like. And it's not that I don't like the other one. It's just, it's what I do for a living, so let me do it. But I thought back to Dave and Kendall and the whole idea of looking at the bigger picture and getting in the character and just getting in there and just doing my job. And so I looked at this, and I made a really long list of everything that was wrong, everything that was right, how I could make things better. It was multiple pages long, and then I just set out to drawing. And I started from scratch and ended up with this, which doesn't look radically different, but is actually completely different. And I was really proud of it. And so I sent it to U.S. Soccer. And I was really, really, really nervous about it. So I did something I don't usually do. Those of you who were in class with me will remember I did not talk during critiques because I generally believe that for work like this, it needs to stand on its own. But in this case, I was like, they're not going to see. They're just going to see that I changed so much, and they're not going to understand why. So I basically went through and was like, here's how it works. Here's why I did this. Here's what I changed in excruciating detail. And they went silent for like 3 weeks. And then they were like, okay, so we're going to set up a call. So I get another conference call, and I'm like, yeah, here it is. This is it. And I got on the call, and my stomach hurt, and they said, we don't like the thing on the J. And I was like, that thing's gone. And then I was like, any other comments? And they said, when will it be done? And that was pretty much it. From that point on, they just were like, just go. I had to do it in 3 months, which this is a year-long project. And I had to get it done in 3 months because they were going to launch the logo, and There were actual like games that had to be played and tournaments and stuff when they needed the new logo and they needed the typeface at the same time. So I worked a lot, nonstop, for that time under the scariest non-disclosure agreement I've ever seen in my life. My kids would walk into my office and they're like, "What are you working on?" I'm like, "No, nothing." "What is that? It was red, white, and blue." It wasn't anything. So I had to work quickly. So I made a big long list of everything that they needed the typeface to do, and it was overwhelming. So I reduced it down to they were going to need big text, they were going to need small text, and they were going to need text on the uniforms. The uniforms were completely separate from the big text because they're even bigger text and they have some specific requirements for heat transfers and that kind of stuff. So the first thing I did was I really quickly made them the one for headline use. And then from there, I made the one for uniforms, which isn't the same. It's a different one, and it's slightly more condensed, and the numbers are different. And then I remembered something from Paul Dean's class. In color theory, those of you who were in there remember the Albers project? So if you take a shape and you make it a light color on a dark background, and you take that same shape and you make it a dark color on a light background, they will not look the same. And when you're a sophomore at LSU, this makes your head explode. And so I was like, soccer teams always have a dark uniform and a light uniform, and it really pisses me off when this happens. And so I made them very slightly different versions so that they could pick and have ones that optically balance. And the whole time this is going on, I was sending them proofs, and I would either get no response or they would be like, "This is great, keep going." And again, only 3 people in the world knew that I was doing this. And so I sent them this thing, and I was like, "Look, I made this thing. It's color graded so that when you do the uniforms, you can have like optically balanced." And they thought I was completely nuts. They called me and they were like, "So do we need to run the numbers by you when we put them on the shirts?" And I was like, "Is that possible?" So, yeah. But from that point, they realized that I was paying attention to their details and really doing things right for them. So the other thing you have to do on uniforms is put the name on. And there's one player I really like for the women's national team, Megan Klingenberg. She has a very long last name. And her name, they would sometimes have to overlap the letters. And it made me mad on her behalf. I don't know if it ever bothered her, but it made me mad. I was like, give her some more respect than that. So I was like, I'm going to make a special version of the typeface from her. And if you ever meet her and she says out of the blue, that weird guy who made the letters, did he really make the one specifically for me? The answer is yes. And for her and Becky Sauerbrunn and Chris Wondolowski too. But yeah, the players with the long last names have a special version of the typeface, all with the subtly graded weights that will never get used because that was crazy. But doing that, I was like, oh, the condensed version's cool. They need a condensed version. And then I started looking into little details like this was one of the designers at Stone Ward. Their advertising agency pointed out that they have to do these banners around stadiums. They're really, really wide and really, really short. And if a letter goes below the baseline, they have to make the letter smaller. And I said, well, the only one that goes below the baseline is the Q. And she said, yeah, but we do a lot of stuff in Spanish, and Spanish has a Q a lot. And I was like, oh, that's a good detail to know. So they have a very special version that they can use when they're making those. They can turn on an alternate, and they get a Q specifically for banners. And they use it, which I was watching a game Tuesday night, and this was on there. And I was just like, that was cool. I remember drawing that. So while all this is going on, they contacted me, and they're like, look, we're going to have a video team in Baltimore. And we're wondering if we could shoot an interview with you for use in behind the scenes video. I was like, I'm not good on camera, but sure. I can do that. And we had to hastily arrange it, and my son's soccer coach set up this thing where I was interviewed in front of a girls' high school soccer game, which was hilarious. Because every time you see a type designer interviewed, they're either at a conference room table or they're in front of a bookshelf. Watch anytime. And I was like, I am not going to be interviewed in front of a bookshelf, so I'm the one type designer who got the soccer game in the background. So I didn't think much of it. Whatever. They were nice. It was weird. So I got back to work, and I was thinking about the website, and this is the typeface that's used for big sizes, used in a block of text, and it doesn't work at all. The letters are too condensed, they're too tight. So I made them a special version that works in really small sizes, all the way down to 5-point, because they have media guides that they have to put a lot of information into, and the text has to be very small. So yeah, that was a real world thing. Hopefully I saved them some paper. So then I made weights and italics and things like numbers that align in tables of statistics. All told, 37 fonts in 3 months, which is a lot. And I was really tired. And then we had the weight. And they introduced all of this in an interesting way. My security clearance on this was strictly limited to the logo and the typeface. I had no idea what they were doing with anything else. So they told me a couple of days before, they said, you're going to be getting a box in the mail. The way that they announced this was they sent out thousands of boxes to celebrities and people that they had identified through social media as soccer fans. And it was really cool. Instead of announcing, hey, we have a new logo, they just sent these boxes out. And the boxes had a little inexpensive virtual reality set of goggles that you could put your phone in and then watch this little virtual reality video in. And the video then introduced the logo. And at the end of the video, it said, now here's a combination for the lock on the box. And when you open the lock up, there was a scarf, because in soccer there's this big tradition of scarves, and a note that said the logo is yours. If you like it, please post it on social media with this hashtag. And so the day that they did that, they turned their website off, and their website was just Twitter mentions with that hashtag. And so like the president showed up with the scarf, and Beyonce, and then like NFL players. It was really cool. And I got into the act and put a picture of Michael up with it. And I put this up right before we left for practice that evening. And then they just started using it. And it's pretty amazing. They send me behind the scenes pictures every now and then, which this is the first time Michael Bradley, my favorite player, put on the new uniform. It was totally awesome. They're clearly very proud of it, and they have these wonderful pictures. This is from a World Cup qualifier last week with my numbers and letters, and there's Jeff Cameron running by some big letters that I made, and they're the American Outlaws with my letters on a jumbotron, which is awesome. And then they use it for social media stuff, which is hilarious. So like birthday announcements for players and coaches and baby announcements and all. I had never imagined they would use it for that, but it's totally cool that they do. This is hands down my favorite thing that they do with it, though. If you follow them on Twitter, whenever there's a goal scored, they put up an animated GIF. And the GIFs basically say to me, we really like our typefaces. And this is just the most gratifying thing. I mean, especially this blue one, it's just like, look at all the weights we have. It just makes me so happy. It's really nice when a client, and they send me emails and they're like, we love the typeface. I'm like, okay, cool. Do you know Michael Bradley? So it was really interesting. The process was fast, and it was weird doing something that I knew would be one of the highlights of my career while I was doing it. I feel really lucky that it happened through a bunch of coincidences. Now, no one ever becomes a type designer because they want any recognition. We are basically the most invisible people on earth, and we like it that way. In fact, I'm really uncomfortable standing up here. None of us do this to be famous, certainly. Well, remember when they shot the video of me? So the night before the launch, I got an email from them, and they said, here's a link to your video. And I was like, okay, so it's going to be a video of like the person who did the logo and the person who picked the colors and the person who did the uniform and then some players going, this is awesome. And then they'll be like, and here's the weird guy who drew the letters. And I'll just go, and that'll be it. And so I click the link and immediately hear my voice. And I cannot stand my voice. I also can't stand watching myself move. So I hit pause and I run downstairs and I'm like, Margaret, you and the boys have to go approve this video. They have to have it approved right now. So she goes up and they laughed, which is not a good feeling. And then they came downstairs and they were like, it's good. It's good. So I thought, okay, so what is it? And they were like, it's you talking about the typeface. It's like, oh, okay, I get it. So they're going to have one about the person who did the logo, and then there's one about the person who picked the colors, and one about the... And then there'll be the one that they put up last, and it's like, yeah, this one, whatever. No. They put up 2 videos that day. The one, the virtual reality video, and the one about their typeface, which was maybe the most surreal moment of my life. To have a client say, we're so happy with this, we want the world to know. And it was deeply humbling and very, very uncomfortable. Because then the parents on my son's soccer team were like, I saw you on YouTube. And I was like, I don't want to talk about it. So remember this picture. I literally posted this as we were walking out to the car to take Michael to practice. And I'm sitting there outside a gym, and my phone buzzed. And then it buzzed again, and then again, and then again. The women's national team's Twitter account posted the video in a way that forced everyone who follows them on Twitter to watch the video. That's like millions of people. And they all started like liking it and retweeting it. I felt like a Kardashian. For about an hour and a half, I was internet famous. And it was horrible. I don't know how they do it because my phone was literally just like shaking in my hand. Like I went from almost 100% power to 0. It was weird. And I hid in my office the next day. And so it was strange. But I'm glad that I did it. I kind of wish they hadn't done the video thing, but I'm really lucky that I got to do that. And it's basically probably going to be the highlight of my career. And I wouldn't have been able to do it if it weren't for the lessons that I learned from a lot of you in this room. So thank you all.